Well, Maureen, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation. We're going to talk about your book. I love talking to authors because I'm an obsessive reader. But we're going to talk about your book that's coming out in March, Gather the Fragments, My Year of Finding God's Love. What a beautiful title.
Thank you.
We'll get into the book. We're going to play a little game first that usually takes a very long time,
Okay.
but it's to front load the episode with some resources. So just a few questions. Was there a book that helped you out early in recovery?
There was a number of books, and I think the big book still fascinates me as a work of literature. As a writer, I can look at that as a work of literature. 12 and 12, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously, but for me, I still am amazed at the 12 and 12. I'm a huge fan of Bill Wilson as a writer. I think he was a phenomenal writer. And so I'm a huge fan of his. And, I was thinking about this and preparing to talk to you that very, very early on, right when I was bottoming out in 1983, 1984, around that time, The Color Purple by Alice Walker had come out.
Yes.
And it was really the book of the year, won the Pulitzer Prize and all of that. And I remember reading that book and really bottoming out, and her vision and her idea of how much healing was possible deeply impacted me. That you could go from so broken and so victimized and have this whole arc of healing and forgiveness and connection and rebirth. And it made a huge impression on me for the vision of what could be possible in a life. So that really impacted me, along with, just like program 12-step literature that I couldn't believe how truthful it was, just how accurate it was. So,
oh my goodness.
And then of course all the little pamphlets that came my way.
What's interesting is all the pamphlets you can get them online now. You don't even have to leave your house, which is my favorite thing.
Some of those pamphlets are so funny. Like,
yeah.
There's the merry-go-round called Denial, and like I can still see, it's just so accurate. It had a little merry-go-round, like a little like basic two-dimensional merry-go-round of denial. It's like, yep, that's pretty much what denial is. So.
Do you remember those merry-go-rounds on the playground that were like stationary to the ground? And it would spin the kids, and the centrifugal force would shoot kids off.
Those were so dangerous. I got caught on. You couldn't get caught underneath those damn things.
Oh my God. I know, but that's when you said the merry-go-round of denial. That's the first thing that came to mind, was this imagery of, man, how we spin ourselves up. We just shoot off into crazy directions. Oh my gosh. But there was so much that you said. I kind of want to unpack that a little bit. I don't know if you know this, but Bill Wilson wrote the 12 and 12 after a psychedelic experience. Did you know that?
I have heard stuff like that. It's funny. You hear different things about Bill Wilson's adventures.
Bill Wilson, sounds like a title of a book.
I mean, I feel, in thinking about talking to you, I thought about like some of the markers of my own journey. And so I remember in 2000, when we went from 1999 to 2000, Time magazine picked 100 of the most influential people from the entire century. Yeah. And Bill Wilson was in that 100.
Oh yeah.
Like That's
amazing.
The idea of what he wrote, the 12 steps, starting with AA and then going to Al-Anon, Gamblers Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, all the groups.
Everything.
Yeah.
There's literally a 12-step group for every, what are we calling it? A vice. I haven't had enough coffee this morning. No, yeah, that's I remember seeing that when that came out, that he was in the top 100 most influential. I remember Oprah even talking about how the 12 steps were like this, this gift from God type of thing, the healing mechanism for our lifetime. It's It's really been impactful for me as well. The color purple, I thought, just to go back to that for 1 second, because if you haven't seen the book, this woman is so victimized, like from rape as a young child, by incest, and having to have a child, and just like all the things, the domestic violence she experienced, to finally this moment where she tells, I forget what her husband, I don't think he was even her husband, but she tells him, everything you try to do to me has already been done to you. And it was so interesting because that is sort of speaking to like this law of karma that I thought was really interesting, but it also is something that we can take personally and internalize in both a positive and negative. It's like the law of cause and effect. That book was really powerful on a multitude of levels.
It's they come so far. The characters start, they start so like just in such darkness, and then the healing between the characters is so beautiful. But yeah, the first time I read it, oh my God, I was just like crying so hard I couldn't even see the page. And just like one of those sort of like epiphanies, really, of just somebody showing you that, there might be more than you believe in, more is possible. So to me, that's like what recovery is. Like, that's why I'm curious to keep going. Well, what more can I find? What more can my recovery, bring me, or what can I bring it? So curiosity, I think.
Yeah, it makes me think, it reminds me that getting sober is just the beginning. It's not the end. It's just the beginning of like this journey inward that never ends.
It really doesn't end, and it is hard.
Yeah. But don't you find that even though there are times that are hard, there are times of awe and brilliance that I never could have predicted?
Absolutely. And you never know when they're going to pop out. You never know when that's going to be. So
surprise.
I do. I love
box.
It's so true. Like, you just don't know, like, because when you're emotionally open, when you're sober and your body is receptive to all these different things, the simplest things can completely disarm you. I feel like, I keep going and keep going, and the simpler things just I can't even believe how amazing they are. It's like almost like my intellect in reverse, really. It's not about intellect for me at this point, ever.
Yeah, it's about the somatic.
It's about the heart. Yeah.
Heart,
it is about the heart.
The heart. Yeah, I find that, what's interesting that makes me think of, like, when I first started going to meetings and sharing, if I tried to sound good or if I tried to help somebody, like I was coming from intellect and it never landed, like it didn't translate. But when I got vulnerable and just spoke from my heart and just stayed open, that was when I felt the connection, because the language of the heart really does transcend all boundaries, it seems like.
Yeah, and you'd get positive feedback. People will come up to you after saying, "You sounded so good," and you're like, "What is wrong with you?" Like, or you'd have like some sort of like sharer's remorse. You'd be like, "Oh my God, like, how did I share that?" And then people were so supportive.
Sharer's remorse. That was hilarious. Yes.
And where that's how you get better. People saying you sound good. You'd be like, "But it's like just reversing everything you think really."
Reversing everything you think. Yeah. No, I have a tendency to be an oversharer. So, I mean, I would have to say some remorse about it. That's just me. But it does sort of balance people out, because even those of us that are self-centered and like to talk about ourselves, Lord have mercy. I noticed that once I felt like I was really heard, I could stop talking.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow,
like
that's so beautiful.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
I love hearing that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I would like process to resolution, and I didn't need to talk about it anymore.
Wow. I love hearing that. So it's like basically, you were able to receive what you needed to receive. It's not just about like putting out those feelings and those thoughts, but like something went in to just heal whatever that, need was, whatever you call it.
Yeah, I think mine personally was coming from this place of needing to be seen, heard, and understood.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have that experience as a child of being seen, heard, and understood. And so I used to tell my business to anybody who would stand still long enough. I mean, the oversharing was embarrassing. Like that's when I had the shares remorse, is when I
Mm-hmm.
was talking to people who didn't want to hear it or who weren't really safe.
Mm.
Right. Like
Mm.
I didn't understand who to trust. And then I got a sponsor, and she and I would talk, at meetings you share in a general way, but in one-on-one, like I was lucky that I picked somebody that was so trustworthy, and I could see it when I shared with her, I could see it in her eyes.
Wow.
That she understood me, and I felt that she got my kind of crazy, and she was like, "Oh yeah, me too." So I was not
Wow.
alone. And then she would say things like, it's okay, you're okay. Like these things that you're telling me were born out of pain. And so she validated my pain, and then we moved to solution.
Wow.
And that's when I could stop telling everybody everything.
And did you have a hard time finding that person to trust? Because that can be a real hard part of everything, figuring out who to trust that you can open up to.
It is. And I recently saw something online. I'm obsessed with TikTok. I'm a content creator, but this gal was talking about, I've tried to trust people in my adult life, and people keep disappointing me. And as somebody who's been through
Mhm.
that, I recognize that they are choosing people that feel familiar from
Yeah,
their
right.
childhood. So these are people that are emotionally unavailable. They are narcissistic, perhaps, or self-centered in some way.
Yeah.
And they are not safe. But if they do it because it feels familiar, like childhood, instead they're learning to trust the wrong people. And to answer your question, I got so lucky that I met a lady who remembered my name's not that easy to remember, and she remembered
Mhm.
my name the second time she met me. And it
Wow.
was like the sign from God. It was a spiritual experience. It was the sign from God that I needed, that she would be the one, and she was
I
absolutely
love it.
trustworthy. Yeah. Yeah. What about you?
In terms of like just the
Find
trust issues.
were you, I know you, well, I'm off my own track, but did you, when you looked for a sponsor, did you have a problem finding somebody that you could trust, or what was that process like for
I
you?
think I really did. I mean, I think just, well, you came in young, we come in young. I was so young and so lost and just like such
A mess.
a total mess. And
Yeah.
so I don't feel like I did really make always the best choices early on. A lot of authority figures, people who were like women who were authority figures, very sort of conservative and straight laced. Just I don't really know how I chose the people, but I will say at that time, making friends, I ended up with a group of friends. Like the trusted people that I had were really the other young people coming in and how
Mhm.
crazy we were and how desperate we were. So I
Young and
always,
desperate.
yeah, I
I
always had
relate.
sponsors, but I think I had better luck really with therapists and with
Mm.
like co-sponsors, people that I could call up. Um, Probably a little bit more luck for me. But that being said, some of these women, they showed me the way in such a powerful way. They'd been sober a while. I knew they had survived things and they hadn't picked up a drink. They would pick me up and take me to meetings all the time. We're always available. Their service work was impeccable. And so all
Wow.
those early sponsors for me, it was really about watching how they did their service work and how they just took me under their wing. And I'm very, very grateful.
Yeah, I've heard the term God being group of drunks. Yeah. And it sounds like you had a really good experience. What city did you get sober in?
I got sober outside Hartford.
Hartford, Connecticut?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So you got sober. Yeah, not all meetings are the same. And it sounds like I had a really good experience. I had women that would pull me aside and be like,
Mhm.
watch out, you're young. And you need to watch out for the wolves in
Mhm.
sheep's clothing. and, they recommended I go to women's meetings. Did you get those kinds of
Oh,
recommendations too?
yes, absolutely. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
and, and to pass that on to other women now, when I have the opportunity to just be like really careful, because it's just, AA is full of, or 12 step, whatever, is full of, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Anybody can go. So you be careful.
Yeah. I
They're
had a
open.
guy. Yeah. I had a guy tell me that, his beef, he'd been involved for about 30 years. And, he said, you have to really be careful because the court system is sending people there that really don't belong there.
That's a
Right.
really good point.
Yeah. And so, and women, and they say that it's not the hotbed of mental health. So you need to have good boundaries
You really
because,
do.
yeah.
And what are the chances that you have those walking in there? Like pretty slim. But I am really grateful when I think back to those times, and I feel like I definitely had a guardian angel, just like keeping me safe from, some of the predators, or just like the experiences that might have really tainted wanting to be in a 12-step arena, like people have that happen. And I'm really grateful that I was able to go. And I think back to my first impressions, really that first year, those first couple of years, and I had never experienced anything like that. I had never experienced that level of community in my whole life. I had never had that.
Yeah. A community of people that you could relate to. Cause I had church community, but I didn't always relate to them because they weren't really talking about,
Exactly.
they weren't getting vulnerable about the process.
Exactly. It's so true. And I just, I think back to like what hooked me into going to meetings, and people would say some things to me that I didn't believe, but I thought, what if they are right? What if they're right in what they're saying to me? They would sort of think those epiphanies would happen, but I was so lost. You're so damaged. I'm sorry. Well, maybe not.
Same.
I was. Yeah, I was like a space cadet when I ended up in there, just like a very physically compromised and emotionally, everything. And what's coming to mind, so there's this guy named Sean. There's always a guy named Sean. There's always a guy named Sean who's kind of like the leader of the pack, like he's like the subtle leader of the pack. And this guy, he'd been sober a while, and he came, I'd been going for a little, maybe a couple months, whatever. He came up to me after I had shared, and he said, if you never drink again, you will never have a blackout. You will never black out again if you don't drink. And Arlena, I was like, I literally looked at him. I was like, how do you know? Like, how do you know that's how it works? Like, it's ridiculous. What? I was just like blacking out. Like,
there's that merry-go-round.
Yeah. Like, just blacking out for no reason. So that was probably, I was so angry at him for saying that, because there was a part of me, I knew that it was true, that if I wanted to not live a life of blackouts, I could not drink safely. It was just, there weren't going to be a whole lot of other options coming along the pike. But I never forgot it was even more than kindness. It was just sort of like an eagerness to really just let me know this was what I was dealing with. And it sounds crazy now, so many years further down the road, but when you're learning about the disease, it has to be, to me, that basic. You're learning about your disease.
Agreed.
And you're a mess.
It's so interesting, the things that you hear that just hit you like a ton of bricks, right? If the right message at the right time can make all the difference. And it's so nice that, there are people we just have that. I feel like I've noticed that impulse to help or rescue. Rescuing is not always a bad thing, and we think of rescuers as heroes, but in the 12-step and recovery communities, rescuing can be a bad thing.
Right.
Because people need to learn on their own. But something you said reminded me of that Gloria Steinem quote that the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And that is like a guidepost to me that I am on the right track. Like there is something here to dive into, to unpack and find out why I'm so affected by it. But so was blacking out a common occurrence for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. That's it. And it's so funny because haven't you talked to people where they're like, oh my God, I don't drink. I would never want to lose control like that. And I was like, people like us are like, that's the goal.
I know.
It's so funny.
Yeah. It is like, thinking about, the whole just the blackout situation and being a blackout drinker. It's appalling to think about that vulnerability of us being young women running around. People can think, let's just say somebody's listening to the podcast and they haven't really thought about this issue that much. And it's like, yeah, think about that. Like an 18-year-old girl running around, not knowing where she is, what she's doing for hours on end. It is hell. It is.
Yeah. No, I mean, and women are so vulnerable as it is. I feel like it's getting worse. And, and it's not that I'm sure, bad things happen to you as well, but it's so appalling. Like, I love that word appalling because it's like, we put ourselves in these situations and it's amazing that we survive them.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I think back sometimes I just, because I live so much of my life now in the moment and the moment of the freedom and not being like ensnared in the actual, using process of the disease. It's been a long time. But when I think back of who I was then, the different phases that I've been through as a woman, young girl, adolescent, or child, adolescent, young girl, young mother, all the phases that I've been through. And when I think back to who I was during that time, 18, 19, 20, being that vulnerable, my heart breaks for who I was at that time. I did have some amazing helpers along the way, some people really being there for me. And I'm so grateful for that. But you're hanging by a thread on some level. It's just mind blowing. And so I don't know if I would characterize this as a positive, I guess it is, but it's why I'm willing to feel the feelings I have to feel now and not drink through anything, not drug through anything, like to stay stark raving sober. I do feel like that's the way it is sometimes. And, like thinking about those things that I heard early on, when people would say, there's no situation so bad that a drink or drug won't make it worse. I know that's true. I absolutely know that's true. So I could choose to pick up, but I know I would absolutely know that I was choosing to make whatever my heartache was even worse. And that's a horrible thought, to think I would do something to make it even worse. And then I wouldn't be able to come back from it.
Right.
So I think the biggest blessing I've been given is to know I cannot use safely. I cannot. It's just not negotiable.
That's non-negotiable.
One is definitely too many.
One is definitely too many. Back to my lightning round, which is never fast. I find that sometimes quotes can like live with you for a long time. One day at a time is obviously something that has, been useful to me. Is there a quote or a mantra or an idea that seems to, stay with you like a thread through your life?
Well, it's funny, again, thinking back to seeing those slogans early on, and that my home group had them written in like those big cardboard, like old English letters.
Old English with the red and black. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny. Like that's how it sticks into my head there. One day at a time has been the most rewarding, challenging thing, without a doubt. I feel like I've been so slow to really be able to practice that. It's taken years and years. And, I have a lot of compassion for myself for why it's so hard, because I'm a worrier, always looking on the horizon, like just really to keep it in the day. But one day at a time is the biggest gift, to just everything else opens up from that for me. But
It really
I don't think I'm
does.
very good at it. I'm getting better.
I mean, you stayed sober all this time. That's pretty amazing. You got sober what year did you get sober?
I got sober in 1983.
83. Okay. You mentioned bottoming out 83, 84. So you got sober in
Yeah,
1983. Wow. You were young. That's amazing.
it is. And I'm so like, I think back to coming into 12 step right around the time when a lot of young people were. So it
Yeah.
was, it was crazy, but
It's so fun.
it was really fun. We did
Yeah.
our best, and it's a miracle we stayed sober. But, in thinking about talking to you today, I was realizing that the people that are closest to me, like the beautiful, deep friendships I have in my life today at 39 years of sobriety, are people from 12 step, and people that also have long-term sobriety. And
Yeah.
we've had each other's backs. We're there. It's a tribe, really.
Yeah. Through a lifetime, through all the things. So I've been sober 28 years. My husband's been sober 34 years. And I have found that also to be true, that our deepest, richest friendships are the ones that we develop, because we have a common language, we have a common design for a living, we all have like this basic framework for emotion management, all that stuff. I have found that in long-term sobriety, like things are different. Like my program is different. I don't find myself going to as many meetings as I used to. I find myself relying a little more heavily on other tools and practices and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How has your sobriety evolved, and kind of like, where are you now with your, like, I hate to say program, but do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
how
I
do you
do.
approach your,
Yeah, I
how do you,
really appreciate that question. And it's like, I appreciate the way you're asking it and framing it. So I think because so much, I mean, I don't know where the time has gone, but it has been a while. But like, just for example, there was, 10 years of my recovery where every single Thursday night I was at that same step meeting.
Mhm.
So there was like that. I would never miss that. There was a long stretch where every Sunday night my home group was a woman's meeting that was as Bill sees it. So there's such basic program. And so now I feel like the steps are absolutely a framework of my life. And I would say that the the 11th step has become the 11th and 12th step has really become front and center for me. So I'm constantly my it is true that my whole day and life is set up to be in as much conscious contact with God as I can be, which is basic 11th step. It's just like sought through prayer and meditation. So I would say now my focus isn't on as much like going to meetings, going to like 12 step meetings, but I am very committed to a church, a Franciscan church. I'm very committed to a Zoom meeting where we talk about spiritual ideas. So, and then I think all of that will lead you right to step 12 of, practicing these principles in all your affairs. Like I think that's the culmination of everything. So no, I'm not the same sort of like rigorous meeting goer that I had been, but
Mhm.
I still structure my life. I have to have a community that is together, that has a belief in something bigger than itself, which to me 12 step definitely has. And so as I've gotten sort of deeper into writing about faith and studying about faith, that has been really like the biggest gift of following the steps, and step 11 being at the forefront of pretty much everything.
Yeah, man, you and I are in the same boat, 11 and 12. Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm not trying to stay sober anymore. Right. Like that ended for me a long time ago. And, like I was saying before, like getting sober was just the very beginning. Like I
Yeah.
rarely talk about drinking or using.
Hmm.
Like it's not about that.
Hmm.
It's about dealing with the core issues that drove me to drink in the first place.
Right.
Because once the drinking and drugging issue was like, once that crisis was over, and then, I went through a long phase of, maintaining sobrieties to ensure that I didn't relapse. Now it's about really the work that can last forever, which is, sort of, healing from trauma and all,
Absolutely.
and behavior patterns, and then doing the work that has purpose and meaning. And it feels like that's for me, like what long-term sobriety is offering. And it's sort of a interesting experience. I had, like, when I was 20 years sober, my predominant feeling was shame, which was really unexpected because I was like, why am I not better yet?
Did you figure out why? Like, what was that about? What
The
was underneath?
shame.
Yeah.
The shame was I didn't realize I had this expectation that I was supposed to be in a different place other than I was. It was like this very disappointing realization that I was still human.
Right. You were like, I'm
A
gonna
bummer.
I'm gonna be so new and improved. You're gonna be blown away when I
I
have 20
didn't,
years.
yeah, I didn't even know that I had
Yeah.
expectations.
Yeah.
And then I hit 20 and I was like, why am I not better? But what I failed to realize is I was so much better.
Hmm.
So much better. I just didn't see it because it was too like, you know that saying, you can't read the label from inside the jar.
Mm.
Like I didn't see what other people saw.
Oh, wow.
All I knew is that there was still all this trauma that needed to be healed. So
It is. It's so humbling because you just are
yeah.
like, but I think once we start to have compassion for ourselves, the idea that a woman would spend 20 years, no, no drinking, no drugs, just like really living life on life's terms. And after those 20 years, still find that she has heartache from something that happened when she was a little girl, like to have compassion for that person because you came by that honestly. I totally identify. It just underscores basically the wound.
Yeah.
20 years of doing all these things and like really living like so hard with your heart open, and you get to that place, it shows you the
Yeah.
seriousness of what happened. That's my belief.
You know what, Maureen, I mean, you just really hit the nail on the head for me, is that, that I was still having grief
Yeah.
about the things that happened when I was really young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it was just such an interesting, unexpected response. And I think a lot of us do feel like we should be better than we are.
Absolutely.
That's a
It's
very
taken me so long to have compassion for myself and really
compassion.
step back and look and see like, whoa, like, are you kidding me? Like some of the things that we've been through. It's so easy to be like that, to come down hard on ourselves, like, oh, you have 20 years, oh, why are you still doing this, or why are you still blah blah, but what voice is that? The inner critic, what is that? Who is that? It's not good.
It's not helpful. It's not
Not
helpful.
it's not it's mean, it's
Yeah.
internalized, and so many women struggle with it.
Yeah, I see and hear it too. It's like, or I've been in a place where I've, been honest about something like, I was just upset with a family member and somebody in the program. It's like, you've been sober how long? Like, this. It's like I have the information, but my feeling response was still painful in some way. And it's like shock and surprise. it's like, oh, that person, it's like expecting the therapist to be healthy. They're usually the sickest ones. People that are in helping professions are typically like struggling with some real stuff. But self-compassion and empathy, I've heard Brene Brown talk about empathy is the antidote to shame. And that really resonates. And it's
I
such
definitely agree with that.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
But you really, like I said, you hit the nail on the head when you talked about self-compassion. I talk about that all the time, mostly because it's something that, I have to be reminded of myself. But there's that thing that we teach what we need to learn, right?
Right.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about before I want to talk about your book, because this is leading perfectly into our discussion today about self-compassion. How do we find it for ourselves? Like, where does it come from? Like, where is the source energy? I think it changes and evolves for a lot of people over time. There's a lot of confusion about it, but let's take a little step back to sort of how we got here. I'm always curious, like, what was childhood like? Because that often sets the tone for everything else that comes after. And when and where, like, what happened to you that you decided that you needed to get help?
So I really appreciate that question, because as a writer, I've grappled with how to tell my story, because working in the lane of memoir can be very, very tricky, because everybody's using that phrase right now, like Prince Harry. It's like, he has a right to tell his truth. Like, everybody has a right to tell their truth, but when you are really working in the form of memoir for a long time, it comes up again and again. So how I handled it with my childhood was in my book, What Was Lost: Seeking Refuge in the Psalms, the book that came out before my recent one. I talked about my dad, and I made a decision as a writer to not fill pages and pages and pages of what had happened, because it wasn't going to help me. I had other people to consider, other family members. And artistically, I wanted to make a different choice about how to handle that material. There's many, many beautiful memoirs out there about, people surviving all sorts of like alcoholic childhoods and that type of thing. So the phrase that I came up with for my dad in writing about him was basically, he detonated over and over again, and we never knew when it was going to happen. So I kept it really small. Now, my father was a Korean War vet. He had been a sniper, and really had issues. He did. Like, that's just the way that is. And some really difficult childhood things that I knew from him as well. But so actually I want to look at, yeah. So I basically had just said, like, he detonated in our family. I think that's the phrase that I used.
That is amazing, by the way.
It was like, I know, Arlena. So it was like, it's just basically, I said, as his daughter, how do I understand the wildfire he held inside himself?
Oof.
That life meant the possibility of death, sudden death, always near, which is what I believe he had as a combat veteran. Is that what made him rage in all sorts of ways, physically and emotionally, and threatening me with death from starvation and cold? And then I continue just saying, like, he just detonated over that. That's basically what happened. My father was wildly and admirably successful in the corporate world, yet emotionally detonated in our family over and over again. So that's the answer to your question, where it was just this, I think it leaves people with the understanding of, we never knew when it was going to happen. And the unpredictability, I deliberately use the word detonated. It does imply violence. It implies shrapnel. It implies everything I need it to imply, a detonation. And growing up like that, I feel so lucky that I was able to find a sanctuary in school and in church. Like, I found my way to systems, I guess, where I could feel, because you know what? I never saw anybody detonate in school. Like,
Mm-mm.
never saw an adult lose it like that. It's like,
Mhm.
wow, okay, so here the adults aren't detonating. And that's my adult word. I don't like, as a child, I wouldn't even have language necessarily.
Right. Yeah.
So um it's it's a rough legacy. And um building on that idea that we're talking about, reaching 20 years of recovery and realizing there's still grief. I certainly feel that way all the years of my recovery. And I can say that it's so humbling for me to admit that based on my childhood, so answering your question, like what was it like? Had that childhood, left home at 17, got sober at 22, and I feel I had the first glimmers of solid self-esteem probably at 54 or 55. It took me a lifetime, and most of it sober and clean, to address the woundedness of that upbringing.
Yeah. And I think so. I think initially, if somebody hears that, like, oh my gosh, that's a long time, 22 to 54.
No, I'm laughing.
But
It is. No, I'm laughing because, I stopped teaching high school last year, but like, I would never want I would always hesitate to tell my students, you guys, it's going to get better, but don't look at the numbers for me.
look away. Well, and listen, there's a couple things that come up for me is that I think our intention is to shortcut the process for people.
Mm,
Like you and I are trying to shortcut the process
mhm,
for people. So,
mm,
I mean, that's the whole point, right? We share our stories to help
mhm,
ease unnecessary suffering. I think some suffering is inevitable, but
mhm.
um, just my opinion. But the you have had many moments and periods of time. I'm going to just, you tell me if this is true or not. You've had many moments and days and times and periods of beauty,
Yes.
peace. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you say, self-esteem, I feel like, because I'm 54. If funny that you should pick that number. But there is that deep sense of self, like touching on the soul's purpose, higher
Mhm.
self. There is
Yes.
something magical about the 50s. So it's something to look forward to. We're not saying that there's going to be no joy or peace or happiness
Oh yeah, no,
until
thank you
then.
no, I really appreciate you backtracking there. So basically I'm talking about, yeah, like the issue of self-esteem coming later on, but throughout the course of my sobriety, I have had the opportunity to travel and see such beautiful things. Obviously having children, motherhood has
Mm.
been the biggest gift, and teaching the teenagers that I got to teach for 25 years. That
Amazing. You survived that.
that sense of purpose of being with them and everything they taught me. So thank you for mentioning that, because for a long time in teaching them, I would only see their hardship. And
Mm.
eventually, what I started to really see was the beauty of their resiliency. And then I
Mm.
could see that inside of myself too.
Oh,
So
wow.
the issue of self-esteem aside, I will say, like, without a doubt, I've been given that gift of really connecting with nature, being guided, finding meaningful work, all of that stuff, and beautiful friendships.
Mm.
Um, all of that has, like, I've had a really good sober time. I think that what the self-esteem issue is about me finally understanding my worth.
Ooh,
And that
yes.
has been a game changer. I have been so happy inside myself since I have accepted my worth.
Understanding and accepting.
Yep.
It's almost like I've been listening to a lot of, do you know who Sam Harris is? He teaches he has an app called Waking Up. I think the book was actually titled Waking Up, but he teaches meditation.
Name sounds familiar.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So he has this app. I've been doing these meditations. I'm like you, man. Step 11 is front and center. And there's this, he has this app, and in the app is a meditation that talks about acknowledging what already is. And it's not like we're trying to get to some future ideal self to like work towards. It's more like the Michelangelo story of the David was always in the statue. He just chipped away. It wasn't what wasn't necessary or whatever.
Yeah.
And so step 11, and in this period of self-esteem for me, has been about letting go of all of the false beliefs about my identity that are negative.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. It's such a powerful experience. And I'm so grateful, that I stuck with it. And I think like looking at that issue of like the worth is really, so much of it was stolen from me as a child. I use that word. It was just taken.
Yeah.
And now I don't feel like I feel all my selves inside of me, like the 5-year-old, the 8-year-old, the 9-year-old, like I feel all of the aspects of myself that I've been my whole life are with me again in a healthy way. And I'm just really grateful I was able to experience it. It's like like, what is that? Like when something's just kind of put together, like pieces are just put together again, is what it felt like. And so, yeah, but I've had so many wonderful opportunities to connect with people, and I can't imagine my life really in any other way. So I feel so grateful that I was able to understand that I had a disease and what I needed to do about it, because there's no way I would have survived it. But now I've been able to live, contribute, and be of service. Like that's the most meaningful thing.
Yes. Having a purpose is huge, and one that can potentially save lives. I mean, there's nothing more noble to me than that. Let me ask you though, so because you got sober so young, you left home at 17. So what happened between 17 and 22? I would imagine, that's where you were drinking and using the most, but I'm so curious about what it was like. And then what tipped you to the point of, did something happen where you were like, I need to solve this problem?
Yes. So 17 to 22, oof. It's a miracle. So basically, I was in college and I was just running around, like somehow, like knowing how to work it still, knowing how to do the bare minimum so I could just keep everything going.
Yeah.
And just a lot of really hard things happened during that time. And I was in Ithaca, New York, and the blacking out got more increased, and the access I had to drugs, of course, was a lot. Well, maybe not of course, but for me it was.
Yeah.
It was a lot. And then
what kind of drugs? People always want to know.
Oh no, it's so I'm laughing that you're asking that, because like now I have to like date myself and be like Quaaludes, which I don't even know if they're available anymore.
I don't think they are. This is one of those things where I was like, damn, I missed the whole Quaaludes thing.
Yeah, I know. It's just so
sounded
funny.
amazing.
We did, there was a lot of LSD available, cocaine, speed, if that's even what we were really doing, like a lot of dirty, same drugs. It never changes, same thing right now. Like you get handed dirty things and it's lethal.
So dangerous now. So I guess bad. It was then too, but no, it's basically, the dirty high, the dirty low, and the dirty numb.
Oh my God, it's like so awful. So, but I think back to that, the whole like 70s, like late 70s, early 80s, definitely a lot of LSD available, and you never knew what you were getting. You didn't know what was going to happen, and you'd be
or how much.
No, exactly. and you'd be psychotic for like days, literally psychotic, just
Days,
running
for
around
days.
days, depending
Wow.
on how much. You never knew.
Yeah.
But
That's
but
scary.
it is very scary. But I will tell you, like, in case you were wondering, Arlena, I was the cool chick, right?
Of course. I didn't doubt it for a second.
Or so I liked to think of myself. Little did I know that I was actually, a mess and people were avoiding me, but like my desire to be the cool chick, it got me in so much trouble. It's
I
crazy to
know.
think about. And when I bottomed out on that, it wasn't fun anymore. I wasn't fun anymore. People were avoiding me. Things were getting back to me about the craziness, like, and the
Oh,
degradation,
the
you know.
stories you have to hear about yourself, and
Yes,
because, man, I remember just talk about me for a second.
please go ahead.
I'm tired of talking about me. You talk about me for a while. No, the blacking out, I think one of the worst parts about that, besides the horror of how I could have been killed and hurt in a multitude of ways, was the emotional shame that I would experience when I heard about what I did
Yes.
second,
Oh my God.
the secondhand information about what I did. Somebody else was interpreting my experience,
Mhm.
and I didn't have a memory to refute what they were saying.
That is, to me, that is hell. And
Horrible.
that
Yeah, it
is
was
really,
horrible.
again, it's like bottoming out in that way of just like, how can a human being live like that? It's so awful. And I know
Yeah.
exactly what you mean. And I can think like, when it started to come back, that it wasn't, I wasn't like, the cool Maureen, the fun loving. It's like, no, Maureen's crazy. It's like, what? Like,
Yeah.
you're,
Like,
and how would I push back against that, Orlando? Like, oh no, you're the uncool one. You don't know, like, you don't know how much fun I am, or like, you're so uptight, you're studying, you're doing this or that. Like, I'm the one. Like, that's brutal to have to defend yourself like that.
oh, I know, it's terrible. Terrible. Yeah. I wasn't surrounded with people that were overachieving necessarily. So, I mean, the contrast of your situation, that sounds like it would have been horrible, because all these people are like getting good grades and on a career trajectory, and you're there blacking out. Oh my God, that's
Yeah,
horrible.
making fun of them, like, just like, it's amazing the depths that you go to defend your own,
Yeah,
sickness, really.
that really is the sanity part. There's that
So then,
merry-go-round again.
to answer your question too, so in my book, I have, I,
The first
um,
book, I forgot, I neglected to mention, yeah,
oh,
you
that's
have
okay.
two books. Give me
Yes.
the title of the first one again.
Okay, I can show you. Okay, I have it right here. So the first one this is What Was Lost.
Ooh, I love
I
that
love this pomegranate. I
cover.
know. So this is What Was Lost, Seeking Refuge in the Psalms. And this is basically
Okay.
when I was talking about using the Psalms to get through cancer and my divorce. And then the new book is a different, same. I have a very intimate style, sort of, not, I wouldn't call it confessional, but just like an intimate, vulnerable style about, my faith and,
Mhm.
my life, which is pretty ordinary when you get right down to it. But the ordinary life is what I signed on for in sobriety. Like, I can see so much beauty everywhere. It never
Yeah,
ceases to amaze me.
ordinary does not mean anything less than awe and inspiring and beautiful.
No, I love hearing that, because that's a
Yeah.
big part of my just a big part of my belief system at this point. That the more I can take, the more I can be connected to that, I just feel so alive. I really do. I feel more and
Yeah.
more alive.
Yeah,
So
to
to
me,
answer, go ahead.
alive means like inspired and engaged, you know. Let me ask you something though. I want to finish that loop.
Yeah.
So what was it that happened that
Yes.
tipped you to I need help?
Yes. So I do have, like, can I read out loud, or would you
Sure,
prefer me
yeah.
to talk? Great, great. I appreciate that. Okay. So this is from the early part of my book where I'm talking about, like, just um you know how did this come about. So I'm talking about a couple years back in Israel. They found this, like, they unearthed this like a mosaic on the floor, and part of it was like this big fat fish that they found. And like, but they were saying like, oh yeah, they think this is maybe where the miracle of the loaves and fishes happened, which is what the book is examining. But they were like, this is like, it's like mediocre tile work. Like he's a mediocre fish. And I was like, really? Like, I like the poor guy, so like I sort of use that as just this idea of the fish. The fish I now feel is mine is the fattest of them all, with a face so cute, so expressive, he's smiling. His eye has one gray stone in the center, surrounded by 7 circles of widening gray and beige tiles, a few orange, a few russet. The scholarly articles judge the craftsmanship of his tile work mediocre, not great art. This makes me become defensive of him and love him even more. Yes, the history of tile work is beyond any schooling I have. Even if he is ordinary and average, this little guy waited under ashes for 16 centuries. I know what it is to wait for a long time, to be found covered in darkness. I began drinking at 13. I spent the following 9 years in a haze of self-loathing, nakedness, wandering, and blackouts. A blackout is drinking and drugging so much you don't remember where you were, who you were with, or what you had done. For several years, I would lose up to 9 hours at a time, last remembering 8 p.m. and then coming to just before dawn, unsure of what happened. I have details, many sharp pieces of these years of ugliness and violence. Somehow I managed to graduate from college with a BA in philosophy and religion. Those studies of God gave me a lifeline, I believe. I had moved to Hartford and sat in my car in a parking lot one night, eating fast food, unwrapping the paper around a fillet of fish in my lap. I thought, I'm going to end it. And I could feel at that moment a dead end, the end of the road. There was nothing more for me, nothing left. I was a body made up of pieces of despair. I could not bear to live. My addictions had shattered me. I'd been shattering myself. I figured, why not just die? Let it all turn to chalk. And by it all, I mean what remained of my life. I knew the wind that would carry my dust away would eventually not even remember it once held me. It wasn't a voice that came to me. It was words like on an electric marquee. The letters went gliding, made of golden, bare light bulbs. The words that moved right to left read, "There's something more." I knew I was being given a message. I felt it in the void of my heart, in my ribcage where a hunger hung that had no beginning and no end. The next morning, I got out the phone book, and in the yellow pages, I looked up therapists. The very first one was a woman named Lois Aaron, listed alphabetically. She had not just one A, but 2, putting her at the top of the list. I called her. I was 22. I thought my life was over until that message came. There's something more.
That is beautiful.
Thank you.
Wow. Man, you're a really good writer.
Thank you.
I was like on the verge of tears. I was like, oh my God. I so identified with the feelings of that.
It's like to be on the receiving end. I do think that was a miracle I received. Like, and everything about me is language. So like when I saw that message, like there's something more, it was just like, just enough to be like, Maureen, this isn't what you think. This isn't it. This isn't the only thing. There is something more. And so I really do feel that ever since then. And then I quit drinking like a month after that. I think that's true all the time. There's always something more. And we don't always see it. It's a lot of it is invisible, but we trust, I guess.
Yeah. Trust in the guidance. Yeah. And I think that's why we need each other, because we're not all crazy on the same day and we all don't run into that dead end road at the same time. And that's another reason why community is so important. But yeah, and it's so interesting that you got this is how books come to me. It's like the right book always seems to find me right when I need it, and it's the word, like you were saying, it's the words, like there's something more. It was that next step on the staircase
Right.
that moved you forward. And so you found this therapist, and did she tell you to go to a 12-step meeting?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because it was
No,
like, no, she's like, of course it's like, I go in, I start talking about my life, and she's just like, well, you
need to stop doing drugs and drinking.
She's like, you're an alcoholic. And I'm like, so what? Like,
and
again, so cool. I'm like, so cool.
Yeah.
And she was like, I'm going to encourage you to, take some action around that. And what a gift that was. That, I mean, I knew she was just sort of like the final domino to guide me, I guess, to finally just try and get to meetings. And I loved meetings as soon as I went. And, like,
I did too.
But don't you think it was like, I mean, I am fundamentally such a nosy person that, like, I couldn't believe people were just sharing all of this stuff.
I know.
And then you'd go back to that same meeting the next week, and it was like a soap opera. You'd get an update on like what was going on in their lives and how everything was working out. And like, I loved, I don't know, like just
the stories,
the characters, just so much. But at my very first meeting, the chairperson said, do you have a schedule book? And I said, no. And I said, no, but I think I would like to come back next week. And he said, I want to make sure you get a schedule book because it can be a long time till next week. And I was like, whoa, what amazing insight and advice and support that was.
That is amazing. I heard early on, it's like, go to, what did they say? Something like go to as many meetings, like I needed a sufficient substitute. So there was like this old guy that said, I didn't know which day I was going to drink on, so I went to a meeting every day or something like that. And that's the case in the beginning, right? Like where you kind of need that support pretty intensely in the beginning. And it does, it doesn't have to be like that forever, but and
let me guess, just in terms of like the characters at meetings, did that guy say that probably every time he shared?
Probably, man. But you were talking about like I was shocked at the things people were saying publicly. Shocked.
I know.
And I was like, I'm messy. I like the tea, right? And it was, now that you put it that way, that's exactly, there was a guy, he was a dynamic speaker. He was like 6'4", like 300 pounds. He's huge. And he would talk about how when he was loaded, he would rape his wife. And I was looking around like, I could not believe that he said that. I was like, everybody can hear you. What are you doing? And she was in the room and he was saying these crazy. And so I had to come back to find out what happened next.
It is. I mean, some of that craziness. I mean, because the disease just takes you, it's just, it doesn't care how dark it gets.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was so interesting though, by being so open about it. And he didn't have shame about it anymore. And I guess, I mean, I shouldn't speak for his experience, but it was almost as if I can share this, you can share your, you're only as sick as your secrets. Like you can share your stuff too.
Were you in California then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got sober in Silicon Valley and San Jose, that area. And tons of meetings and lots of long-term, there was a lot of really good quality meetings. So I feel for the people who don't have that, that all they have is like the one meeting that meets once a week with 4 or 5 people, and they don't like the people. They're not, do you know what I'm saying? Like I really, but the blessing of the pandemic was that now there's all these Zoom meetings all over the world. So now there's ways to connect with people
Yeah.
in recovery
Do you
from
use
all
a
over
lot
the
of
world.
Zoom? Like, how are
Almost
you using Zoom?
exclusively
Okay.
now.
Okay. And that's
Yeah.
working for you?
Yeah, I don't like to leave my house. I don't know if it's just a season of my life. Like I've, you know, created some content recently about going back to therapy because apparently it's not healthy to isolate for 3 years and make
Mhm.
4,782 bars of handmade soap. So, but I do love the Zoom meetings. I love being able to hear people's stories from
Mhm.
all over the world
Yeah, that's
now.
awesome.
Yeah, that's super cool. But
Mhm.
in the beginning, I had to have people. You know, there was something that you said about showing up to the same
Yeah.
meeting every week for years,
Mhm.
years. How, and if you think about what friendships are, is that you hold space and you're present to listening to people's good
Yeah.
times and bad times. Like you chat before and after the meeting, but it's not just listening, but it's also sharing. I never left a meeting feeling worse if I shared, and
Mm.
sharing is so important.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you had that. Did you have it? What was your relationship to sharing, when you first got sober as opposed to later?
That's so funny because I was like, um, you know, I saw the same people a lot. To your point, I would see people Monday night, and then it'd be like, "Oh, see you at St. Thomas Wednesday night," and then Wednesday night it'd be like, "See you Friday," like, and that would be a long time. Oh, see you in 2 days. But I remember this guy telling me when I was like 4 or 5 years sober, he was like, we were friends, we'd go out for coffee with all the people. And he said, Maureen, your first 2 years in recovery, when you shared, you were like a space cadet. And I was like, a space cadet. I was
What?
deep. I was like, I was deep. Are
I
you
was
kidding me? I was
deep.
so deep. No. Um, I think early on it was just like getting the hang of it, getting the hang of saying things and sharing. But I do know that that visibility is, I think, what started to heal me the fastest was being visible to other people and just that general kindness. And when people talk about like the meeting after the meeting, the hours I spent in parking lots after I shared was a big part of what I did, talking to people and laughing and just forming that the fellowship that keeps on going,
Yeah.
basically. But early on, I think it was a lot of just trying to fit in, trying to figure out the lay of the land. And I do like to make people laugh, so I was probably a little bit too clever and
Same.
at the expense of being honest, making people laugh, finding something creative and original. And so thank God that died down after a while. I didn't need to be quite so performative, I guess. I hope.
Yeah, that really speaks to me, the whole performative thing. I think I still do. Damn it. Yeah, but no, I does your message. I feel like once we get out of our head and into the heart, then that's the message that translates. Yeah. Let me ask you, so you and I have a lot of similarities, so many similarities. And I had a bunch of religious trauma. So I had completely rejected God. And it wasn't anything anybody did to me, but it was my misperception of what religion, was about. And it just didn't work for me. But when I got sober, I did sort of revert back to the God of my childhood.
Mhm.
And I know that, is it fair to say that you're religious?
Yes, I think that almost everybody thinks of me that way. I don't always think of myself that way, but I am. I believe like what is our definition of religious? That we trust a religion, that we practice a religion. I think the answer is yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there was a lot about it that didn't make sense to me. But as I reflect on it, I think the intended, and I'm just talking out of my ass, quite
No,
frankly.
I'm curious what you're going to say. Keep going.
Well, I do believe the higher purpose of it was to bring forward stories and lessons that would help us throughout our lives.
Mhm.
And it's often taught in a paradigm of parent-child, which
Mm.
I relate to, right?
Mhm.
I was a child and then I became a parent, and then so I had both sides of the story. And so I feel like the intended purpose was to tell stories that we could relate to.
Yes. Mhm.
To help us throughout our lives. But then my practical experience of religion and religious people, obviously not you,
Mhm.
um, was this hypocrisy that I couldn't get over.
Mhm.
I just couldn't get past it.
Mhm.
And then in my mind, I go, people are only human. It doesn't matter if they're religious or they're not religious. We are all human. We're all doing the best we can. Everybody lives with a degree of hypocrisy. That's part of our. So I find myself rationalizing and justifying, but and I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And so I was so grateful when I got to alcohol. Well, when I got to, I'm supposed to say the thing, but when I got to 12-step rooms and I had a sponsor that was like, what is your definition of God? And like I told her I struggled with God. She goes, well, people that struggle with God typically struggle with somebody else's definition of God.
Oh, that's
Isn't
beautiful.
that
That's
good?
yes, yes, that's
Yeah.
really good.
And so she was like, I was always like, I'm a science girl. I need something that makes sense. Because when I grew up, it was like God's love is so great and
Mhm.
it's so vast that our puny human minds couldn't possibly fathom the vastness of God's love. At the same time, and my mother was not religious, and I was super religious going to this church, and my mom was not. And I couldn't reconcile the idea that my mother was going to go to hell. And I'm thinking, God must love my mom at least as much as I do. And I would never
Mhm.
allow that to happen. Right. Like I would sacrifice my
Mhm.
own self and for her
Mhm.
place. I love my mom so much. So it was things like that that I couldn't reconcile. And then seeing what people were doing in the name of or behind or hiding
Mhm.
behind.
Absolutely.
And so you know, that was sort of where the struggle was. And then when I got to 12 step, they were like, oh, you can come up with your own definition of
Mhm.
an understanding of, and this is step 2. This is like right in the
Right,
beginning,
right. So right,
right in
exactly.
the
Right.
beginning.
So
I,
basic and so
I have,
beautiful.
yeah, I had a gal come on who spent 34 years in being sober, I would say, not in recovery. Um, and she wrote an entire book about higher, friendlier powers. Great book, amazing
Mhm.
person. But I haven't been able to shake the thought that if she had just done step 2 34 years ago, I wonder how her life would have been different. And that's me being, me. But I loved that I was able to do step 2 right away with a sponsor who was like,
Mhm.
you can come up with a concept of God that makes sense to you. And so I have
Absolutely.
largely just been like, the energy of love and universal
Mhm.
source and things like that.
Mhm.
Did you never have those struggles with religion?
I did have a lot of struggles with religion, and I'm not really what you just said. So you were, oh yes. So the second step, the idea of like being part of a large group where people are saying, it's a God of your understanding, like a higher power of your understanding. I'm so grateful for all of that guidance in 12 step because it's true, because I don't want to be cagey about what I'm actually doing. I am a practicing Catholic. I am writing from a Catholic lane. And I always am so, um, like, I guess relieved when people give me feedback that they can read my work and I'm not trying to like convince you of anything. I'm just saying I have gone deep into these rituals and deep into these practices and these beliefs. This is what I find. And that really is, I think, years of being in program where I was taught very basic concepts of I have a right to mine, you have a right to yours, and we're going to be fine. We don't we don't want to like no controversy, address, supports or opposes any causes. Like, let's just be together. And so I think that's my fundamental position, even though I'm sure there's, obviously there's Christians and Catholics fight among themselves. The fighting that goes on in house is so demoralizing to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I practice the Franciscan way, which is basically a way of great simplicity and love. For me, in terms of like framing it as an 11th step thing, I do go to church. When I go to church, it is about my relationship with God. It's about us sort of me showing up and knowing that God is going to show up for me in that, like in that, sort of like a cloister almost. I know that if I make that effort, and the Catholic Church is very ritual, it's very ritual oriented. There's a lot of movement. You stand, you kneel, you walk, you get communion, you bless yourself, you get holy water, you look. It's just, there's a lot of moving parts that are very sensual to me that I love. And I've always loved that. But again, because church, I always felt very safe in church. My dad was the one who took me to church, but it was the one time I could be with him and actually be safe. So like that level of trust is extremely old for me. It goes all the way back to when I was a toddler. That's my history.
Yeah.
That being said, when I'm in that place of actually being in church, and I go to a very beautiful old Italian church in Hartford, Irish Italian church that has all stained glass windows. It's very beautiful and very lush, and it's a Franciscan church. When I'm in that moment of being there, it is about the beauty of my belief and honoring the beauty of my belief and seeing if I can carve out a place in myself even deeper to receive that beauty of God. That's why I go.
Wow. Carving out a place. I'm going to have to think about that one for a minute. Carving out a place in myself to receive. I feel like that is the hardest part, is the receiving. I felt like that was the main point of religion. Or the main message of Jesus was about forgiveness.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's so
total acceptance, total love. He's like, I'm not here to judge you. He said that. I'm not here to judge you. It's like, just basic things. He's just, saying like, I love you and I want you to love yourself and each other. And it's always about the love, always about the beloved. It's so distorted and so warped. I totally see your feeling. People talk to me frequently. The story that you shared with me about like what your journey was, I'm on the receiving end of those stories now, and I feel that, and I have a great deal of compassion. Again, I'm not trying to like convince anybody of anything, but it's people have suffered, and people looking at hypocrisy, scandals, people being warped, not really acting like in a Christian way. I totally get it. I see it all the time.
Yeah, but it's everywhere. It's not just in the
valid.
church. It's
no,
everywhere.
It's not just, it's a valid, your points are absolutely valid and need to be heard and honored.
Thank you. Yeah. It's interesting to me. So it's the undertones that I think, I don't even know what to call it, but like these little components you were talking about, trust and safe, trusting and being, trusting at church and being safe at church and being guided, and then the acceptance, forgiveness, and so in my mind, I translate that to our recovery community. It's like, where can we find those things? Like, where is it easier to accept? There's a lot of criticism of 12-step communities because of a variety of, it's not the hotbed of mental health and blah, blah, blah. I found all those things that you were talking about in that community.
Right.
And so I think the temptation for us is to say, well, if this worked for me, this should work for you.
Right.
And it's not, that's not and we don't, but people are so tied to their own identity that to hear that something different worked for someone else is very threatening.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I've had to struggle that I'm a 12-step advocate because it worked for me. And I'm like, here is my context and perspective on these topics. And this is why it worked for me. But I hear people all the time who are like, this did not work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me sad. But at the end of the day, it's like, if you can check these boxes of community and sharing and safety and trust and getting to, that's what matters. And,
Mm-hmm.
listen, solving the crisis of drugs and alcohol is important, and do that any way you can. But I think the deeper path is, or the more enriching path is to use all these mechanisms to go deeper to, like you said, I don't even know if I could say it again, but like carve out that place where you can
Yeah.
receive.
But you're right. Things have changed so much over the years with how treatments and meetings and all of these different things. Like I saw this commercial the other night that was saying it was for some, recovery thing. And it was basically like people come to your house to help you. You can be in your house and somebody, and I'm like, what? Like, how could
That's wrong.
like
Yeah.
got to go to High Watch? You got to go to, Betty Ford. Like, but these things are evolving. It's if we trust that they're evolving in a way to meet the needs of people.
Yeah. Meet people where they're at. Yeah.
But that just, they're like the old school part of me was just like, well, what do you mean? Like, you're not going to have to leave your house and somebody's going to come there. It's like, well, maybe like it's just thinking outside what I think is thinking outside the box, but that's thinking outside the box that I've been put in, so, but you're right. It's, and people, you just want, especially anybody coming in, anybody who suffered, we want them to be safe. We want them to understand that they don't have to be in the clutches of such an ugly disease. There is another way. And, and I see all these different ways, like, the refuge recovery, people like putting Buddhist things, like there's been some really interesting things going on. I'm not a part of that, but I know of it, and I certainly support it if that's what if that's where they're finding solace and they're finding, hopefully like true recovery. When I listened to your podcast about the California sober issue, I loved listening to that because I know that comes up a lot. And, I was very informed by what your guest said and what the definitions were, because sometimes that comes up with people about like being partially sober, still getting high, smoking pot, whatever. And, I still do think that is the line in the sand. I do believe that. I think that people need to get there, however they get there. But I think if you're truly an addict, we have to be so vigilant about our addictions. It comes in so many shapes and forms. It's so insidious.
It really is. Yeah. There's definitely a difference between sobriety and recovery. And then even the definitions of sobriety are so ambiguous. There's so many definitions. Like we're in a realm where we're like, oh, you could redefine what God means to you. And then they go, okay, well, I'm going to redefine what sobriety means. I'm going to redefine what recovery means. And so now we don't have a common language to discuss things. And there's a lot of debate, but at the end of the day, it's like, I love what you said about simplicity. And to me, it's like, does it bring me peace? Does it bring me unity, and does it foster love and unity? It's like, if it doesn't, then it's not for me. And I've quit trying to figure out what's good for you.
Right.
The longer I'm sober, the more I realize I don't know what's right for you. You have to figure that out.
Right.
And I'm not going to judge it because I don't know. I just don't know. I think the temptation is like, you and I have seen a lot of people die.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of people that don't make it and we get scared. And I think that's why people freak out so much, because death is on the line. That's a real possibility.
It really is. And just I think the saddest part is the degradation of the disease. When you're active in the disease, something isn't right, but like how do you address it? How do you break free of what that degradation is? And then we almost develop such a high tolerance for the degradation. That's, to me, the scariest part of the disease. You hear people say, well, I would never, I would never do that. I would never do needles. I would never snort something. I would never do this or that. And then
one
they
day.
are. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I found myself in those situations, and it's, but to just break free of it, for me, like I said, I, I have to be very careful about putting anything inside of me. And I'm very cautious about how I go about my life in
Yeah.
that way. But I live a life like, Bill Wilson said, you don't get sober to just stay in meetings. You get sober,
Right.
like you get sober
to get back into life.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I always loved that. He's like, no, I'm not talking about living here.
Yeah,
I'm
don't live
talking
here.
about, so you can go to your friend's wedding and be
Yeah.
okay. So
Yeah.
you can, I can go to the casino. I've been to Italy 3 times, twice by myself. I was fine in a
Yeah.
country where wine is flowing. Like, you can be safe,
we went to Italy over the summer for the first time. We were standing outside waiting for a table at this restaurant, and the guy came up to us with 2 glasses, and I instinctively took it, and I go, "Is there alcohol in this?" And he looked at me like I had 10 heads, and he was like, "Yeah." Like, of course. And I had to hand it back, and I go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you, but I don't drink." And he just was so confused. He's like, "Nothing, no alcohol." I go, "Nope, never." And he paused for a second. He goes, well, good for you. That's probably very healthy. So I just thought that was funny, man. Like, yeah. And you're right. To your point, though, we don't get sober to live in meetings.
Exactly.
Yeah, we can go anywhere.
And that's the whole point, is to live a life of freedom like that without being beholden to, when's the next this, when's the next that,
Right.
or I don't know, like, it really is like, it is a new freedom. It is.
Yeah. New freedom, new happiness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, this might be a good place for us to wrap up. I can obviously talk to you
I
all
know. I mean,
day.
I was so looking forward to it, because I was like, I do believe I believe in being guided, and I just believe, like, knowing I was coming on the podcast gave me a chance to really reflect on what my experience has been. And I really appreciate you listening to that and creating a space for me to be able to share what that journey has been. And it's like such a gift. And I appreciate all that you do on the podcast. It's a lot of work, and you're putting it out there, and your mission statement of trying to alleviate suffering if you can,
Mhm.
is so noble. You're not saying, you're just like, I'm going to try, and then that's what you're doing. So I really
Thank you.
appreciate the space that you create for people to talk about these issues.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I feel like today has been therapy for Arlena. So I greatly, some people are just so easy to talk to. And I'm like, oh, such a good listener. That must have been from years of being a teacher, huh?
I do. I mean, and again, it's my fundamental nosiness as well. I'm always just, what's it like for you? What's it like for you? But yes, I do love, listening is a gift to really connect your heart to another person's, and really listen is, I feel less alone. When I truly listen to somebody else, I feel less alone. I get so much out of it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story and for writing these books. We didn't even get a chance to really dive into the book. I'm so glad you read some of your writing.
Thank you. Thank you for
Because
making space. I appreciate that.
that really highlights your talent for writing. So I'll encourage people to read both your books. I'll leave links to them in the show notes.
I would really appreciate that.
Yeah. And if people are interested in connecting with you or finding out more about your work, do you have a website or somewhere you would like to direct people?
I do have a website. I have to make sure. It's so funny. Like, I was
You're looking for it. Oh.
And I was like, was writer in there? So I'm at MaureenO'BrienWriter.com. And then on Instagram, I'm Maureen O'Brien Writer. I guess that's what I am.
Yes, you are. That's one of the many things, right? Maureen, thank you so much for your time today. My heart is full, and I know this will have a great impact on those listening. So thank you so much,
Arlena. I appreciate everything that you do. I look forward to hearing it, to hear, like, just what we said could go into the zone. And I appreciate you really making space for that. Thank you.
Thank you.